You are listening to Sambandh, the Royal Norwegian Embassy's podcast, where we unpack Norway-India relations. What happens when one of the world's renewable energy pioneers joins forces with one of the world's fastest growing economies? And how can the two countries work together to power up the transition to clean energy? My name is May-Elin Stener, and I am Norway's ambassador to India. In this episode, I'm joined by Bård Vegar Solhjell, former Norwegian Minister of Environment and now CEO of Renewables Norway, Fornybar Norway. We talk about the opportunities, challenges, and surprising lessons our countries can learn from each other as we build a greener future together. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sambandh podcast. Today we will be talking about one of the most important topics shaping our shared future, the transition to renewable energy. Norway and India are strengthening our cooperation in this field, bringing Norwegian technology to India's scale in order to accelerate the green transition. Energy is one of the 5 main pillars of the Norwegian government's strategy for cooperation with India. Although Norway is a small country, we are a big energy nation. And many Norwegian energy companies have been active in India for a long time. For example, Norwegian company Statkraft was one of the first international investors in the hydropower sector in India, starting over 20 years ago. We also have ongoing collaboration through the Norwegian Climate Investment Fund that has invested over $350 million in solar, wind, grid and transmission lines projects in India. I am very pleased to be joined today by Bård Vegar Solhjell, who is the CEO of Fornybar Norway, Renewables Norway, the main industry association representing 400 companies in the Norwegian renewable energy sector. Bård Vegar, welcome and thank you for joining us here in New Delhi, India today.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here with you.
So tell me, why is the Norwegian renewable sector interested in India?
So my first thought, well, of course we are. I mean, who's not? India is increasingly an important global player in any field, really. But of course, in the energy transition, which is, like a global megatrend in this century, India is at the core of what's happening. So it's the 3rd biggest solar market in the world after China and the US. And if you look at the numbers, their deployment is absolutely amazing the last few years, and they're increasingly also a manufacturer. India is also interesting because of their use of the combination of solar and batteries. Of course, solar is growing a lot. It's become the cheapest source of energy in most places in the world, but it's unstable, right? It only produces as long as the sun shines. But when you install it with batteries or other forms of storage, you can get a stable production of renewable energy also. And this is increasingly what India is doing. And then, of course, it's also a big market for Norwegian companies, like you mentioned. And we are representing quite a few solar companies that are investing in the global south, the biggest being Scatec, which is present here in India. So I think you can say that there are 2 purposes for us to be here. First, to learn, to understand more about India's role in the global energy transition. And the other is to promote or to create the grounds for partnerships beyond those that already exist between companies in our sector and in India.
Well, that sounds good. And you are here this week with a delegation from your association. What is it that you are planning to do to achieve what you are talking about here?
So we have a quite comprehensive program, really, almost a week or 5 days here, which is a combination of meetings in Delhi, with ministries, with think tanks, organizations here. So we've already been here a few hours, and I mean, I've been to India quite a few times before, and I'm always struck by, just the level of insight, competence that you meet from all kinds of institutions. It's really, really amazing to see, and that every time I've been here in different issues, it's the same thing. And then we are, for me, it was also, a big point to see some of the huge facilities that are being built and has been built in India. So tomorrow we are flying to Ahmedabad and further on to Khavda to visit Adani's big facility there, which when it's finished, planned in 2029, will be one of the biggest solar or renewable facilities in the world. And just to give you an idea, I mean, it will produce around 30 gigawatts of power. Many people don't know that, but just to give you an idea, that's the total of all Norwegian power produced. So we are a country of only 5.5 million, but we use a lot of electricity up north in the cold. So I can't imagine in how big the facility must be. It's solar. I've heard it's also partly wind, and of course with flexibility. And that's that combination which is becoming increasingly important. We want to see.
So that's why you have to go there and see, because you can't imagine without seeing.
I really can't imagine. I mean, I have seen. I've seen solar facilities which I thought was quite big. They were 1 gigawatt. So, so this is just a different size, and I think I would say a different size than we're used to anywhere in Europe, really. So I think it's important, to be able to communicate it, to see it. Then we are going to Bangalore. We planned I've called it a technology day. I got to know Nandan Nilekani a few years ago through my previous position, and he's of course an amazing person, and there's also lots of companies and startups and so on around him there and his company there. So we're going to visit some of the startups there working with energy, and also meet experts and GOs. And then we are going to Andhra Pradesh, to the facility, another facility built by Greenco, where they are using pump storage of water as part. It's much smaller, only 7 gigawatts, which is, by the way, much bigger than anything I've seen in my life. But the point there is the use of hydro or pump storage, which is a very familiar technology to Norwegians. But here it's used in the combination, as a kind of a battery with renewable sources. So this is it's a new experience every day. And I've been to India a few times, and the last time I was here, I remember I wrote a column to a Norwegian newspaper saying being in India is like being in the past, in the future, and in the present at the same time. And I think this will be a bit like it, very, very different regions, very different experiences. But also, I think to understand India, you have to see more than meeting rooms and in the capital.
And you will travel to really big parts of the country and to several states just in this one week. So I think that will be you will be seeing a lot of opportunities. And that's my next question. What do you think are the key opportunities for collaboration between Norway and India in the renewable sector? Are there any concrete technologies or areas where there is a particularly good match, for example? Or what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a very good and important question. And I think I'll answer it, in a way in two ways. First, where can India learn and things from Norway or get technologies and capital competence from Norway? And where can we get competence capital from India? Because they tend to differ a little bit. So to start with the last part, of course, what's happening now on solar, especially and on batteries in India, could potentially become very important, not only for Norway, but for Europe. Because solar is being deployed now at a large scale also in Europe and increasingly with batteries. But by now we are very dependent on Chinese producers. So China controls most of the value chain, from rare earth minerals through wafers and the end projects. And they've done an amazing job of getting costs down. But of course, being so reliant on one country's production, whichever country it was, is not in the long run a good idea for a continent. So when we see India now becomes a really important manufacturer, that could also be important. So there's global competition, and there we could be able to get the price even more down, and also, of course, for security policy reasons, create an alternative to China. And I wasn't aware how important it has become for India to produce or to build a value chain of production themselves. And I mean, every meeting we've had so far, this is presented as a main goal. And I think that's really, really important and an important opportunity also for Norway and Europe. Then if we turn it around, of course, we have common ambitions in some fields where Norway is already strong. Offshore wind, which is starting in India now, but it's at an early stage, is something Norway is working with, both bottom fixed, but because maybe more interestingly, floating offshore wind. So Norway and India share a continental shelf which is quite short, and then if you go a little bit distance out, it's deep. That means that floating could be the most important alternative, and this is actually, we have this in common with many coastlines in the world, from California to Japan and Korea, Australia. And this technology is not very developed. Norway has many of the experiences and the competence that's needed, from ships to transformator stations to a service industry, and of course the competence of actually having a floating facility offshore. So I think that's a field where we should work more together, and I noticed that there's a lot of interest around that. Carbon and capture, CCS, carbon capture and storage is another an area which is, I mean, it's not a mature technology, but it's being developed and looked at in India, but also in Norway. We have two big projects now, one on cement and one waste management, and both of them, are areas which are hard to abate, where there's a lot of carbon emissions, which is not so easy to get rid of just through electrification. And then, of course, I would say that with the huge market that is now emerging in India, more Norwegian companies should probably look in this direction. I think in one of our meetings there was a very good expression used. That was anecdotal risk. That maybe too few companies in Norway know of the opportunities and tend to have an idea about the problems. But I think that both solar, wind, and also, of course, pump storage, hydro, many Norwegian companies could look to India to invest. So for us also to come back and to tell the story and to be able to service them on the opportunities is an important part of it.
So that sounds very good, and it's a very good reason to visit India and to see. And now, particularly after Prime Minister Modi visited Norway last month or in May. You were talking about the offshore wind, so I just thought about, because I also heard you say in one of the meetings that Norway has been an oil and gas producer, and now in the energy transition, some of the technologies that we have been using for 50, 60 years, they are very useful in this transition. Is that the offshore wind you are thinking about, or is it broader than this?
Exactly. So it could probably be broader, but it's most obvious when it comes to offshore wind. Simply because the technologies needed to install and to get big installations out to sea, to service them and so on, are not so different. So we see that. So in Norway we have approximately a third of all the ships. These are very special vessels to transport offshore wind. They already service the European market. We have a service industry. We build transformator stations. They are needed both to transform oil and gas products to electricity and to transform the electricity that comes from offshore wind. So I think that this competence that is from oil and gas is much more useful in the renewable future than people know. And also for many of the companies, whether it be oil and gas companies or the service industry, they are doing both today. So I just visited one of the biggest industrial players in Norway called Able. It's their facility in Haugesund in Western Norway alone has like 2,000 employees. They have around 50% of their income from oil and gas and 50% from offshore wind. So this is an example of someone who's kind of transitioning into something else, and both oil and gas and offshore wind will be with them for a long time. And I think that's also an advantage for them in many ways, that they're not starting from scratch. They are building on technologies, and they're used to getting costs down, for instance.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very good example of why should Indian actors partner with the Norwegian companies. And you were also mentioning carbon capture and storage, which there is of course a huge need for also in India with big cement factories, and so there are several things and technology things that we do and technologies that we have that will be useful. But would you sort of like to elaborate a bit more on that? Why you think Indian actors should build partnerships with Norway? What is special with Norway?
Oh, that's very easy for me to answer. But to start with that, so like you will know that Prime Minister Modi's visit just a little bit more than a month ago created a lot of interest. It was a big news story in Norway and throughout the Nordics, really. And I noticed that many Norwegian businesses already had an interest, and that the visit also played to them going from interest to actually taking a closer look at the opportunities. And I think if you look at the bigger picture, so one reason would be that Norway is a renewable country. People know it's an oil and gas country, and that for sure is important. But we do have existing competence in many fields. On hydropower, for instance, pump storage, we've done that for more than 100 years. So it's we have companies, competence, engineers, the whole value chain. Also, we are interesting, I think, as a partner because of the level of competence we can bring to operations and the institutional strength of these partnerships often. So I think it's an interesting way also of being able to get competence, and through institutionally well set up partnerships. Also because Norwegian companies have always cooperated with foreign capital and foreign companies. We are a very small country. It wasn't possible to build these things in Norway without partnerships with others. So typically a project in Norway involves other countries. So we're extremely used to these types of partnerships, from our public institutions to the companies themselves. And then of course, seeing into maybe I'm repeating myself, but of course there are some especially difficult issues. CCS and offshore wind are difficult. It's more difficult than solar and onshore wind. I think just cracking these issues together, or building partnerships when we do it, is a better way than taking all the risk by oneself. So.
Well, I think that's a very good pitch for all Indian companies out there and other Indian actors. Why should they look to Norway, or why should they grab those opportunities when the Norwegian companies come here? But also you were talking then about the more difficult areas. Would you say anything more about what are the challenges? Are there any barriers to closer cooperation? What would you say about that?
So I can give you an impression and say a few words about what companies are saying, and maybe it will also be interesting to hear your view on that, because you're probably much closer to it. What are you seeing from here? But I think, first of all, most people or in companies I talk to see opportunities when they, you say India. It's very different from a decade or two ago. They are thinking a huge market, a growth economy, and a country with with a well-functioning financial market and with lots of competence. So it's worth remembering that many Norwegian companies are already here. I was in a meeting with Aker Solutions, which is a big engineering company, just a few days ago, and I was mentioning I'm going to India and say, oh, by the way, we have 1,300 people, working there, because the level of competence is so high when it comes to engineers and others, and it's a really strong and good operation for us. So it's
for our listeners here, 1,300 people in Norway is a big company, because we are a very small population. In India, it's not always a big company, but for one Norwegian company to have that many people here in India, it's big.
It's true. I was thinking exactly the same thing. That's sizable. And they were producing, specific parts to installations along, where different parts are produced in Norway, others in Korea, and some in India. So it's already there. But of course, I think the main challenge is probably more around the regulatory environment than these other issues. So capital, competence, market is there. And then, for instance, when I asked one of the big Norwegian companies that they were bigger before, they would say that it's a profitable market, it's a good operation, but they also have to spend a lot of resources on talking to the government, on quite time-consuming work around that. And also, at some level, an uncertainty around regulation. Whether that's fair or unfair, I'm not sure. And I've been working with countries in the global south, and I've sometimes I found that that what you can call anecdotal risk, like I referred to, or perceived risk, is bigger than real risk. And India could be an example of that right now. At least it's extremely important that the perceived risk isn't bigger than the real risk. And I think my first impression from being here is that that might be the case, actually. And just to give you one example, because I know Norfund is a substantial investor here, is the Norwegian Development Finance Institution. So they are making money in almost every market they are. They're hugely profitable. And these are typically markets where people in Norway or in Europe perceive that it's really hard to make money.
Yeah.
But then their mandate is to be there, and they are making money. Yeah, I think that's a good example that you tend to overestimate the risk in some of these markets.
No, well, and I totally agree with you. Most, at least those who look to India, they see opportunities and not that many challenges. I also think, though, you are right that maybe those who see challenges are looking back and not forward, because a lot of things have changed in India. And I see a willingness from Indian government on union level and on state level to actually also try and solve the problems that different companies meet, and also to try and really, be part of the journey and to help those technologies they want into the country. And also we have a new treaty, Trade and Economic Partnership Agreement, between the EFTA countries and India. And this treaty, after this treaty, they established a separate office that can help Norwegian and other EFTA countries companies into India. So there is a lot being done already to try and then meet the challenges that will even make it probably more positive and more will see opportunities. So I think your pitch is very, very good on that. But let's then close with this big picture perspective, because India's green journey is really important for global success. I often say when I'm asked that, without India, the world, the planet, will not be able to reach the climate goals. And how do you think India's transition to renewables will impact the world if we look at that big picture?
So I think you can't really imagine the world in this century without India being an important player. I think in most fields, really, and India will become more and more important and dominant in so many areas. And in the energy transition, I think it's partly about climate, but what I've learned here just after half a day, it's that it's increasingly about energy security and also a clean tech competitiveness story for India, which is really interesting. So, of course, you're right. India has one of the. It's the biggest economy with the highest growth by far. It will use a lot more electricity, manyfold to do today in a decade or two. So without a very strong growth of renewables and a stronger grid and so on, it will be a disaster for the global climate. If they manage to go through with all these really ambitious goals, it could be one of the most important contributions to the global climate. So huge opportunity. But of course, I think it's happening is also that the Hormuz Strait crisis has made energy security even more important for Asian countries. And we clearly see this here. They're a big importer of oil. That is risky. It would be, of course, safer if they had the bigger energy independence. And finally, very interesting today also to see how they think about their future or how they think about renewables as one of the main sources of increased competitiveness, to building a tech sector where they can be an exporter of green tech in the future and play a role alongside China on that. So I'm amazed to see how the level of ambitions, but also I think the ability to go through with this, and I see India being dominant in the future of energy, also because they are taking this chance that the energy transition will happen, and then they will have the ability to lead.
Well, thank you very much, Bård Vegar, for sharing your insights and for a very interesting conversation. It's clear that the potential for closer cooperation between Norway and India in the renewable energy sector is significant and timely. finding the right partnerships will really be key to driving this transition forward. That's what I take from what you are saying. So thank you very much also to the listeners for joining us today. We hope that you found this discussion both informative and also inspiring. Maybe it will even create some new partnerships. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.